My name is Ankur Patel. I'm the Director of Advancement for Hindu University of America, and we do these weekly webinars, bringing all sorts of different aspects of interesting topics, courses, things that we're working on. We actually started this quarter with a webinar on equating Hinduism and caste, the state of California versus Cisco systems. We did that back in January. We've had several webinars on caste because it's such an important issue. And we're going to continue that theme today with Is Hinduism Nothing More Than Caste? And our special guest is President of Hindu University of America, Sri Kalyan Vishwanathan. And I can't speak highly enough of Kalyanji. In so many ways, he's laid the foundation, he's made the connections, he's built the team, he's inclusive, he's always available. It's just been an amazing journey for me. I'm in my third year with Hindu University of America as the Director of Advancement, and we're growing, we're increasing enrollment, we're building connections, we're deconstructing the Western projections onto Hinduism and claiming our own narrative, our own history. And one of the things that always comes up as Hindus in America, Hindus all around the world, we know it, they tried to tell us about caste and how it's so bad when there are, it's not even an Indian word, right? It's not in any Indian language, but they don't have any clue about Varna or Jati. They don't understand so many different aspects of it, but they project it onto us. So wherever you're in the world, maybe you could put your name in the chat and your location. Let us know where you're at. That's always a cool thing to see, the diversity of Hindus from around the world who are participating in these webinars. And I don't know if I need to give Kalyanji too much more of an introduction other than to say it's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this webinar. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat. And Kalyanji, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, terrific. Great. So it's a pretty thinly attended webinar today. So I want to welcome everybody to this particular session. Now, caste is a difficult topic, a provocative topic, and it is a topic that immediately polarizes the Hindu community. There is so much confusion, so much emotion, aggravation around caste. The question becomes, can we even have a reasonable, responsible, patient conversation about caste? Is it possible? In fact, there was somebody who texted me the other day complaining that I was even bringing up caste. In other words, it seems at least some people feel that the way to deal with the subject of caste is to never talk about it. Never talk about it. Okay, so obviously I'm not of that mind, and I think it's an important discussion that we Hindus ought to have, and it's a conversation where there is more heat than light generally. And today's conversation, I hope will generate more light than heat. Okay, so with that preamble, let me begin my deck. Okay, good. So the title of this webinar is Hinduism Nothing More Than Caste. In other words, if you know caste, you know all of Hinduism. There's nothing else left. At least that is one of the narratives. In fact, it is the dominant narrative in place today. Now, I want to start with a different question, though. What is the significance of our lives? What is the significance? We were all born someday and then we'll die one day. I mean, there's no exception to that. Nobody's going to beat that schema, that pattern. Now, during the time we are alive, we get to pursue a lot of things. We go after many things. We compete. We go after success and fame and glory. And, a lot of interests, right? So, what is the significance of our lives as a human being? It seems around the world, whether you are an Asian or a European or an American or an African, it doesn't matter. The first concern is for security and comfort. We want to be secure, we want to be comfortable, we want to have certain conveniences which makes our life comfortable, convenient, and secure. And if that is taken care of, then the next thing we seem to want is to have a good time. Have a good time, whatever that may mean for you, for each one of us. We want to have a good time, enjoy ourselves, have fun, go to Miami Beach or some other place, or Cancun, and so on. So the thing is, in Hindu thought, this was recognized as predominantly the first two pursuits of human existence, Artha and Kama in Sanskrit. Artha and Kama. Is that all there is to life? So that is a question. Is that all there is to life, to human existence? So you became secure, you had enough comforts and conveniences, you had a good time, and then your time was over. Is that all there is to human existence? What else is there that is worth pursuing? Okay, so I'm going to leave that question hanging now because it's going to, and we'll come back to it because it's a very important question. Now let's move on to another question. Can Hindus have an intelligent conversation, an intelligent discussion on caste? Is it possible? Or, is the answer no to this question? Is it no? Because the discussion will get immediately polarized and it will generate more heat than light. Somebody will get agitated about something. Somebody will take a very strong position. This is the way it is. I'm not going to listen to any other position. Or maybe, yes, we can have a discussion. But in the end of the day, there'll be no light. There'll be no light at the end of the tunnel. And we'll only keep getting more and more agitated as it progresses. Agitated with whom? With each other. With each other. Maybe. Well, maybe we can have an intelligent discussion on caste. What does it depend on, though? Does it depend on the quality of the conversation? Perhaps the quality of the openness of the participants in this conversation? What does it depend on? Okay. Here are a couple more interesting opening questions before we go there. It seems like whether Hindus talk about caste or not, it seems others will not let go of caste. Others will not let go of caste. Here is an example. The specter of caste in Silicon Valley. The New York Times. Indian immigrants from Dalit backgrounds are rising up against caste discrimination in their workplaces in the United States. Remarkable headline. Okay. Because there was one incident, one complainant against one person. So it's immediately generalized into the whole community is agitated, is rising up, and so on. And of course, we have our favorite Oprah Winfrey and Isabel Wilkinson, the origin of our discontents. All of our discontent, meaning our grievances, modern grievances, is we are becoming an increasingly grievance-driven society, complaining about something, complaining about some group of people, accusing somebody of stealing our rights, of not fulfilling our prerogatives. And the origin of all this discontent goes back to caste, apparently, according to Isabel Wilkerson. Oprah is so proud of this book that she's been distributing it to the CEOs in North America. And of course, we have our own homegrown equality labs, which is driving this discourse. They managed to provoke the state of California to come up with this lawsuit against Cisco, which has since been postponed. The case is being postponed to later in the year, so it's not yet resolved. So caste is in the air. People are talking about it, whether you and I like it or not. I mean, that's going to go on. So we've got to find a way of talking about this in an intelligent way. Now, here is a question. Question number one. Okay. Does the presence of castes imply discrimination? Okay. A corollary question could be asked. Does the presence of races imply racial discrimination? Or the presence of races imply racism? Or in other words, does the presence of caste imply casteism, caste-based discrimination? Is it automatic? Okay, because the presence of races is unquestionable. There are the Europeans, white people, there's the Africans, the brown people, gray people, yellow people, the red people, on and on. So there are different races in this world, just as there are different flowers. There is the rose and the lotus and the daffodil and on and on. There are different races, and that's part of this creation, part of this world. But does the presence of races immediately imply racism, or the presence of caste imply discrimination? Can castes exist side by side without there being caste-based discrimination? Is that possible? Can caste-based discrimination be eliminated, reduced, mitigated without eliminating the underlying castes? Is that possible? I mean, in order to eliminate racism, if you had to eliminate all races in this world, that's not a terribly good solution, isn't it? Or is the caste system, so-called, by design a discriminatory system that must be eliminated in its entirety? In other words, the only way of eliminating caste-based discrimination is by eliminating all castes themselves. Is that the only solution to this problem? Okay, so these are very provocative questions. Okay, so just hang tight there, these questions. Now here's another question. Is discrimination an aberration or the norm? Or the norm? For example, if murders happen in a society, then can we say that the society as a whole is a murderous society? In fact, far more murders happen in the United States per 100,000 population or per million population than there happen in India, far more. In fact, twice the number. Okay, if you go and look at the statistics, there are twice as many murders in the more than twice as many numbers of murders in the United States than there are in India per 100,000, per million, etc. Does that make one society more murderous than the other? So what we're doing is we're taking an aberration and casting it as the norm. So how do we ascertain if murders such as gun violence in Western society, a feature of Western culture, or it's an aberration of the norm? It's an aberration. It doesn't happen. But it happens all too frequently nowadays, right? Similarly, is caste-based discrimination an aberration in Hindu society or the norm? See, one of the dramatic features of the discourse about caste is that the aberration is consistently, deliberately, intentionally recast, reframed as the norm in Hindu society. This is not to say there isn't caste-based discrimination. There is, and there is a lot of it. And many of us have experienced it, one way or the other, maybe in the reverse discrimination form, maybe in its original form, or whatever, in some other form. But is it an aberration or a feature of Hindu society? Very important question. We've got to ponder about this. Because, we're dealing with a discourse that is disconnected from the facts on the ground, from disconnected from ground reality. Out of millions and millions of interactions happening on a daily basis between members of different castes, when there is one incident of caste-based discrimination or a caste-based violence, it immediately makes the New York Times headlines. So what is it about the New York Times and the Washington Post and so on, that they keep waiting for the aberrations to occur so that they can cast it as the norm? And you can now draw other parallels, such as when continually aberrations are recast as a norm. Okay. Now, it's important that we recognize that we have inherited two narratives about caste, two different narratives about caste. The first narrative is the Western narrative. Okay, there's a more recent narrative about the caste system, and basically what it says is Vedic Hinduism is guilty for having invented the caste system, which is nothing but an unmitigated evil that must be eradicated at all costs. And if it is necessary that in order to eliminate the caste system, if it is necessary that every Hindu must convert out of Hinduism, and Hindu itself must come to an end, meaning it must be eliminated, must be eradicated, then so be it. The world will be better off without Hinduism and its caste system. Okay, this is one narrative. Equality Labs is pushing this narrative. Christian missionaries are pushing this narrative. Leftist liberals are pushing this narrative. It's the dominant discourse we face today. Now, here's an alternative narrative. The social order of Varna and Jati, which was established in the Vedic times, has helped India remain Hindu even under extremely adverse conditions. And despite the extraordinary rhetoric against it, sort of a relentless rhetoric against it, the system only seems to be getting stronger and more entrenched through the present day phenomenon of caste-based vote banks and reservations and so on. In other words, this thing has been around for 5,000 years. The United States of America has been around only for 300 years. This system has an inherent stability, a sustainability, a longevity, that it lives through ups and downs, through political upheavals, through complete reformation, recasting, invasions, conversions, colonization, and on and on. There's something about that system is very, very durable. And its durability has sustained Hinduism. This is another narrative, okay? It's another narrative, very different. Now, there are at least two narratives. I said we have at least two narratives. There are several more in the spectrum. Okay. People can, you all probably have a narrative of your own, which is a slight variant of these narratives. Let's move on. See, we had to begin by recognizing caste is not a Hindu word. It's not an Indian word. It doesn't occur in any Sanskrit or Tamil or native Indian language text. If that is the case, then how can India have a caste system that is 5,000 years old? At least 5,000 years old, because it doesn't exist in the language. So caste comes from Europe. It comes from Spanish, Portuguese, casta, and it first entered the English language in 1613. We must recognize that the caste system is the way the outsiders to the Hindu world, outsiders being predominantly Europeans, understood and represented the social order that they saw and experienced in India. In other words, they saw something, they experienced it, and they gave it a name. And that name came from their own experience back in Europe. And they started writing tomes and tomes about this system, this particular social order. And they said India had a caste system. In fact, India had the original caste system. Everybody else learned caste from India. When Isabel Wilkerson says caste is the origin of our discontents, when she says our discontent, she's talking about our as the whole world, the global discontent, the American discontent. Everything goes back to caste, according to Isabel. We are left with two questions then. Okay, caste is not an Indian word, it's not a Hindu word to begin with. It never existed for thousands and thousands of years until it got injected into the discourse about India. We're left with two questions. What are they? Well, the first question is, well, how does it matter whether we refer to the underlying phenomenon as caste or we refer to it as Varna and Jati? Are we not talking about the same thing? In other words, is Varna and Jati the same thing as caste? Okay. Next question is, well, are we talking about the same thing? If Varna and Jati are different than caste, if we say that Varna and Jati, the original Sanskrit words, are different than caste, then in what way are they different? Very critical, right? These are the two questions we are left with. The word is not the thing it represents. So in the case of something like this, water, whether we call it water or pani or aqua or jal or apaha or neer or Greek nira and so on. Interestingly, Tamil neer and Greek nira are the same words. Interesting. It makes no sense to say I really love water but I hate aqua and so on, because the underlying thing is the same thing. It doesn't matter what you call it. But in the case of Varna and Jati, are we talking about the same things? Unfortunately not. Why? Because these words are embedded in two vocabularies, in two different narratives. So for example, the term Varna and Jati arises in conjunction with a cluster of ideas and concepts. I've captured some of them here, such as moksha, dharma, karma, yoga, brahman, janma, jnana, bhakti, vedanta, pramana, etc., etc. Okay, there's a lot more I can add. Guna, sattva, rajas, tamas, and so on. Whereas the other conversation arises in a different narrative, a different vocabulary, Aryan invasion, Brahminism, superstition, caste, Dalits, untouchability, human rights, discrimination, Hindutva, nationalism, exploitation, Neo-Vedanta, and on and on. And the ideas, Varna and Jati, are embedded in a narrative, in a conversational structure, which consists of a cluster of ideas that are closely related to each other, which constitute a whole, a certain worldview. Similarly, there's another set of ideas, Aryan invasion, Brahminism, and so on, which belong in a different category, a different genre of ideas, which originate in a different narrative. These are two different narratives entirely. Unfortunately, there's been a paradigm shift. So whereas Varna and Jati were related to Guna, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, to Kula and Gotra, Dharma, Karma, Janma, Punarjanma, very important, Samanya Dharma and Vishesha Dharma, Antyaja and Avarana. Okay, these were the ideas, cluster of ideas that arose together, that arise together even today as a cluster of ideas. of a cluster of concepts. Right? Here we have a different vocabulary: caste, subcaste, upper caste, lower caste, forward caste, backward caste, most backward caste, other backward caste, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, untouchability, casteism, Dalit, etc. Totally different vocabulary, totally different narrative. And there's been a paradigm shift. The old vocabulary gave way to the new vocabulary. So the new paradigm, how did this happen? Well, it's happened during the colonial era. So here is a chart on the GDP of India. For nearly 1400 years, from 0 CE to 1400 CE, India's GDP per capita was the highest in the world. In fact, when Columbus was running around trying to discover India, it was not because India was destitute and poor, but rather because it is extremely wealthy. That's when he stumbled upon America. So, but unfortunately, India has gone through two periods of invasion and colonization, which were very devastating to India, to Bharat. Okay. So here, Vasco da Gama arrives in India, brings the word casta into India. Columbus arrives in America accidentally while he's looking for India. And they were all looking for India because India was very wealthy. And the Varna Jati system was very much in place when India was very wealthy and so sought after by the world. Okay. And then there was a collapse. And during this collapse, there was a paradigm shift. So what happened? Well, India was subject to an economic disaster, the likes of which have never been seen in history, in human history. Over a 200-year period, approximately 45 trillion US dollars in contemporary dollars was extracted from India, according to recent estimates, published by the Columbia University Press. Okay. Besides an economic disaster, there was a loss of language. Sanskrit was systematically eradicated and replaced with English. That's why you and I are talking in English today, because we lost the language. And with it came a loss of literacy. India was one of the most literate societies in the world, one of the most literary societies in the world. And in fact, it became completely illiterate, nearly completely illiterate, with hardly 3% of the population having some ability to read and write around 1900, 1900, so on. During this time, there was a transfer of epistemic authority. Epistemic authority means the authority to speak for. Who speaks for Hinduism? Well, it slowly transpired that it is the West which speaks for Hinduism. It's the West which speaks about Hinduism. And it keeps on speaking, it doesn't stop. One might wonder, why does the West not mind its own business and stop talking about caste or Hinduism for that matter? But no. According to Dr. Arvind Sharma of McGill University, there are some 9,000 books that have been written about the caste system of India. Almost all of them have been written by Westerners. And we've got to find out, why are they so preoccupied with the Indian caste system? Why? And in that process, over 9,000 books, caste becomes a central principle, an organizing principle of Hindu society. Caste is introduced formally right around 1870, 1871. Okay, that's when it starts to become official. So here's what happened. What happened was, there was a colonizer and the colonized. Clearly, the British colonized India. And in Marxist terms, there was exploiter and exploited. Just to use his term for a moment. But then the discourse about what happened reframed what happened. Reframed. The discourse about what happened reframed what happened, and presented the British as a civilizer, an emancipator who's come to save India. And the exploiter and exploited was recast so that the British can play the role of civilizer and an emancipator while extracting the small fee of $45 trillion for their great service. This is the central phenomenon that took place over 200 years, 250 years or so, that we need to understand. And this discourse has become institutionalized, has become received knowledge. So when Oprah Winfrey talks about caste, Isabel Wilkerson talks about caste, they are simply regurgitating and repeating what has been discussed ad nauseum for 200 years during the colonial era. In Western imagination, caste is everything. The person who introduced caste formally and systematically all over India, the word caste and the entire vocabulary of forward caste and backward caste and scheduled tribe and all other vocabulary was Herbert Hope Wesley. He was knighted for it, for whatever he did. He was born in 1851, died in 1911. He implemented the caste enumeration into the census of 1901. But let's take a look at his life briefly. What happened? Well, he came to India in 1873. He was 22 years old, not much more than a kid, really, but a kid with a massive responsibility. He joins the person with the name W. Hunter Statistical Survey of India. The British were surveying India. They set up a Surveyor General's office. They were trying to figure out what they have accidentally got a hold of. What's the scope of it? What's the state of it? What does it contain? And so on. He becomes the Undersecretary of the Home Department of the British Government of India in 1879. How old is he now? He is 38 years old. Not even 28. He's 28 years old, and he becomes the Undersecretary of the Home Department of the British Government of India. Now, imagine, can a 28-year-old occupy a position like that? But he could, because he was British, you see. And he goes on to conduct the Ethnographic Survey of Bengal, 1885 to 1891. 6 years he spends an ethnographic survey of Bengal, and he cuts his teeth with the study of India's groups and communities and so on. Eventually he introduces it formally in the 1901 census of the British India, and caste becomes ingrained in Indian discourse. That's the origin of the word caste in India. Now, how did Varna and Jati get collapsed into caste? Well, if you read the Hindu texts and you look at the Hindu society, from the texts you get Varna. Mostly the texts speak about Varna across the board, from the Vedas to the Upanishads to the Brahma Sutras to the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. You get an enormously vital, significant discourse about Varna. Not so much about Jati. Jati is not discussed that much at all. In fact, there is not really much of an enumeration of Jatis. There are enumeration of kingdoms, enumeration of rajas, of regions, of geographical locations, but not so much Jati really. But if you look at Hindu society, it exhibits many Jatis, in fact, thousands and thousands of Jatis. So it leads to the question, what is the relationship between Varna and Jati? And here is where there is a great deal of ambiguity and confusion. Now, in fact, we ourselves are not very clear what is this relationship. For the British, it was even more unclear. So what they did was they just collapsed these two conceptual and empirical phenomena. The phenomenon of Varna, which is primarily a textual and conceptual phenomenon, and Jati, which is primarily an empirical and therefore physical phenomenon, they get collapsed into the word caste, which is of Western origin. Okay, now let's move on. The two narratives, Varna and Jati on the one hand, and caste on the other hand, originate in two paradigms. Narrative one, Varna and Jati is, as I pointed out already, it is embedded in a cluster of terms called Guna, Karma, Kula, Gotra, Visharta, sattva, rajas, tamas, moksha, dharma, artha, kama, parampara, sampradaya, achara, guru, desha, kala, devata, grama, and so on. There's a lot of concepts that are riding on this varna and jati ideas, on these ideas. But narrative too, the caste system, it's completely consisting of a different set of ideas. Start with the Aryan. The Aryan, it's so central to this. Aryan, Dasyu, Dravidian, conquest, invasion, migration, race, racism, skin color, Brahminism, purity, hierarchy, oppression, exploitation, human rights, untouchability, Dalits. These are completely different narrative structures, narrative architectures, if you will. And these two originate in two different paradigms. But these two narratives are collapsed into one in our contemporary imagination. Okay, it's collapsed into one. The Hindu mind is mixed up today. So you get guna and karma alongside rights and skin color. You get kula and dharma alongside Aryan and Dravidian. You get kama and tamas alongside invasion and sampradaya, artha alongside Brahminism and oppression, devata, rajas, kala, hierarchy, migration. So this whole thing is completely confused, collapsed, commingled. It is so hard to, it's like a badly tied up knot. It is very hard to unknot it or untangle this knot. You see, that's the difficulty we have with this phenomenon today. Now, narrative one, if you look deeper into the narrative one, the most famous verse on Varna is in the Bhagavad Gita. Chatur Varnyam Maya Srishtam Gunakarma Vibhagashaha Tasya Kartaram Apimam Vidya Kartaram Avyayam. The four Varnas are created by me, says Krishna, according to the distinctions of Guna and Karma. Guna and Karma. Not Kula and Gota, Guna and Karma. Very, very important, right? So what is this Guna and Karma? Well, Guna Karma Vibhagashaha. Let's look at it a little more carefully. So if you look at a tree, what you see is the tree, but what you don't see are the roots which are below the ground, right? This is the unseen, the seen, the unmanifest, the manifest. So Guna is the unmanifest, Karma is manifest. Guna belongs to the inner world, belongs to one's character. Karma is what you do, what is visible. Guna is sukshma, hidden, unmanifest. Karma is stula, manifest, visible. So there is this relationship between inner character, unseen and unmanifest, and outer behavior, which is visible and manifest. This is guna karma. And there is a relationship between the two. And in Hindu thought, the inner character always matters more. The primacy is always given to the inner character. It is the character that drives outer behavior. Of course, outer behavior in turn shapes inner character also. So you can now get into a virtuous cycle here, where your inner character drives increasingly more refined behavior, more noble behavior, which is a virtuous cycle, and vice versa, where your outer behavior then begins to mess up your inner character. So this is a mutually reinforcing cycle. But guna karma, this is guna karma vibhavishaya, according to the Bhagavad Gita, inner and outer. But the extraordinary leap that Hinduism makes is that guna is not an accident. One's guna, one's character is not an accident. It's also a karma phala, a product of one's past karma in prior lifetimes. Now, without this, it's impossible to make sense of the Varna Jati system. This is a critical, significant, proposition of Hindu thought, that we all live many lives and we carry forward impressions from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. Now, in Hindu society, we elevated the group or the community over the individual. So in modern contemporary society, Western society, you have the state, you have the individual. You have strong individuals, and you have a very strong militarized state. Of course, individuals are also fighting to get militarized, either against the state or against each other. But the point is that the associations that individuals may make into communities, into groups, and so on is much weaker in modern contemporary society. Okay, you can think of an association of people who play baseball, the association of therapists, American Psychological Association, American Medical Association. These associations are loose. People come and go. They don't have stickiness to them. In fact, what is real in contemporary Western society is there is a state which is very powerful, and the individual is struggling to be powerful, as powerful as the state, or at least more powerful than the other individual. So there's extreme competition amongst these individuals in Western society. On the other hand, in Hindu society, okay, the power of both the state and the individual was blunted by the presence of communities. It was blunted. The presence of communities negotiated the relationship between the state and the individual. So we ended up with very strong communities, but very weak states, states that couldn't defend themselves, got invaded and colonized again and again and again. And it might happen very well again, because it doesn't look like Hindus are figuring out how to create a strong state. So Varna is distinguished by guna and karma, not kula and gotra, not skin color or race. And the primary ordering principle of these communities, the question is, was it one of interdependence and collaboration primarily, or was it meant to be based on competition and exploitation of one community by the other? It's a very important question, okay? One that I think we have to look at more carefully. So the group or community was classified into varnas. So you had the spiritual, intellectual, martial, economic, and business, labor, and physical. Now you see, varna is a universal. It's not ethnic. It's not ethnographic. It is not specific to India. So let's, for example, now briefly look at American society. Now you get the spiritual, intellectual, get the teachers, professors, priests, advisors, ministers, and counselors. Martial, commander, soldier, police, security, judge, lawyer, and so on. Entrepreneur, business owner, CEO, manager, investor, economic and business. Worker, craftsman, skilled laborer, service provider, and so on. So now I ask you a question. What is the distribution of American population into these four categories? If I ask you that question, what would you say? What would you say? Just type an answer, okay? What is the distribution of population in the in the contemporary society, any society? What is the distribution of the population? Somebody. What do you think? Put some numbers on the chat window, okay? Some numbers. What percentage of the population is interested in spiritual, intellectual pursuits? Yeah, Jay Bansalji is saying 10, 10, 20, 60, okay? 60% business, really? 80% labor, says Siva Subramanian, okay? One number is not sufficient. I don't think there's anything like that. No, you can find it. You can actually study this very, very carefully, and you'll arrive at a consistent number across different societies, okay? And I'm going to give you an estimate, okay? I mean, don't attack me because it's just an estimate, okay? The likelihood that we are way off is quite small. Here are my estimates, okay? The spiritual intellectual community, the teacher, professor, priest, advisor, so on, is about 5%. Yeah, Aarti Kaushal, 1% on the top. You're talking about a different society. Okay? It's a different ordering principle you're talking about completely. Martial military class, that community is about 5%. The economic business is about 5%, this community, but 15%. And 75% is the labor physical workplace. Now this, we may be off 1 or 2% here and there, maybe 3 to 5% here and there, but this is characteristic of most contemporary societies. Okay, not just contemporary societies, but largely even ancient societies. This is the whole idea that Varna is a universal, you know, based on guna and karma. Guna karma vibhagasha. Very, very important. So what is Varna? It's an anthropological construct. Was it born of intermixing of Aryans and non-Aryans? Varna like race? Or did it have a spiritual or adhyatmika origin to it? Well, if you read the texts, you read Bhagavad Gita, you read the Upanishad, you read the Mahabharata, you read the Ramayana, you get a very different formulation of Varna and Jati. Okay. So here is another verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Brahma karma. What is Brahma karma? Tranquility, restraint, austerity, purity, patience, integrity, knowledge, wisdom, and trust in the Vedas. These are the qualities of Brahma karma. Brahma karma swabhavaja. Doesn't say Brahmin caste. Doesn't say that. Brahma karma, the qualities of Brahma karma, the actions, the behaviors, the manifest ways of being in the world arise from these gunas, these characteristics. Tranquility, restraint, austerity, purity, patience, integrity, knowledge, wisdom, and trust in the Vedas. That is Brahma karma. Kshatram karma, Bhagavad Gita again. Kshatram karma. How Kshatram karma, the qualities of the Kshatriya, how it manifests is valor. The characteristics of valor, strength, fortitude, skill in weaponry, resolve, never to retreat from battle, large-heartedness and charity, and leadership abilities. These are the natural qualities of Kshatram karma. Again, it doesn't say a particular jati or caste, or it says Kshatram, the qualities of a particular kinds of manifest actions and behavior, Kshatram karma, arise from these qualities. This is the discourse within the Hindu world. It's consistent across the board, across the Shruti, Smriti, Purana literature. And lastly, Varna is not a single hierarchy. So if you think about it in terms of knowledge, you get one kind of hierarchy, Varna hierarchy. Think about it in terms of military, you get a different kind of hierarchy. Think about it in terms of economic, you get a different hierarchy. And if you think about it in terms of numerical strength, you get a different kind of hierarchy. And today's politics, where democracies depend entirely on numerical strengths, the community that's empowered is the one that is numerically strong, naturally, right? So the whole idea that this is somehow a single hierarchy, in the way the West imagines this, is completely false. There are at least 4 different hierarchies here, and maybe even many more in between, other hierarchies here. Now, what is Jati? Jati is a local phenomenon. Jati is not a universal. Jati is, unlike Varna is a universal, Jati is local. It depends on Desha and Kala. So if you go and read a text, an obscure text that was written in Bihar, that enumerates Jatis, it will give you a listing of Jatis in Bihar. And if you go to Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra and read a local text that originated in that region, you'll get a completely different list of Jatis, which are specific and unique to that locality. But Jati is a much more sticky phenomenon. It's not a loose association like the American Medical Association or the Association of Ballroom Dancers in America or something like that, right? So Jati is a much more sticky phenomenon. It starts with guna and character, guna or character, karma or vocation or or profession. It's also tied to kula, lineage. It is tied to devata, deity, very, very important. It is tied to achara, practices. It is tied to sampradaya, tradition, and associated gurus and so on. It's also tied to desha, place, and lastly, kala, time. So the jati is a highly variant, highly specific, location specific, time specific phenomenon that nevertheless changes through time. And it has so many dimensions built into it that it's very sticky. It doesn't quickly band and disband like loose associations of individuals do in contemporary society. Jatis are not static and fixed communities. They are dynamic and they change across generations. For example, if you plot Varna and Jati over time, over time meaning many hundreds of years here on this axis, and say this is 4 Varnas here, whichever way you organize the hierarchy. If you organize it in terms of economic wealth alone, then Vaishyas will come at the top and Brahmanas will come at the bottom, etc. Okay, we've seen that already. But here is the thing, Jatis could be entirely confined to one Varna. It could then slowly morph in time to subsume another Varna, maybe a third Varna, and eventually completely lose the original Varna and acquire a new Varna over many, many, many generations. I'm talking 200, 300 years. Similarly, it can also happen in the reverse order, which is a Jati too can begin in one Varna and slowly over time morph, subsume multiple Varnas, and completely acquire a different Varna in course of time across many, many generations. See, this principle of the dynamic interplay between Varna and Jati is completely lost when you conflate the two into a single term, Western term called caste system. This is a great difficulty that we face today as Hindus. Now, here is an example, the fall of a Kshatriya Jati. So this is a queen, Velu Nachiyar, princess of Ramanathapuram. Now, she married the king of Shivaganga. She was the first queen to fight against the British in India. And she actually defeated the British in a war in 1780. Okay, she was first defeated, she went into exile. When she came back and defeated the British, reclaimed her kingdom in the south of India, and ruled it for 10 more years before she died. Unfortunately, this Nachiya and her husband, who belongs to the Tevar community, okay, his name is this Muthu Vadaganatha Periya Udaya Tevar. It's a massive name. But these communities, the Tevar and Nachiyar communities, today are classified as backward castes in India, backward castes. So you got to wonder, how did the Kshatriyas in 200 years become backward castes? And what else happened in those 200 years among Varnas and Jatis of India? See, the problem is this. In the Western paradigm, it's just karma and artha. It's a battle for who gets what, how to distribute wealth, how to generate wealth, how to prevent the other person from becoming wealthy, how to redistribute the wealth, and so on and so forth. And within the world of artha and karma, there is not much scope for dharma and moksha. And the absence of the distinctions, dharma and moksha, creates enormous confusion. The principles of interdependence and coexistence gets rendered into, get recast, reframed into a framework of competition and exploitation. Varna and Jati gets collapsed into caste. Now that's the Indian narrative. Now let's look at the Western narrative. We move to the Western narrative. Now this narrative started from Europe in the 18th century, 19th century, and so on, and centers on the Aryan race. The Aryans, where did the Aryans come from? Did they come from Iran? Did they come from Anatolia? Did they come from the steppes? From Russia, Eurasia? I mean, where did they come from? This is the preoccupation of 19th century Europe, 18th century Europe. And this preoccupation is fueled by the discovery of Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a great mystery. And William Jones, speaking about it in 1786, says, oh my God, Sanskrit is so similar to Greek and Latin, and is the mother of all the languages of French and English and German and so on. And he says that no philologer could examine all of them, Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, that is, without believing them to have sprung from some common source, which perhaps no longer exists. This is William Jones, 1786. James Mill, 1817. Now, this is the colonial voice speaking. Okay, the British voice speaking. The Hindu is disgusting. In truth, the Hindu, like a eunuch, excels in the qualities of a slave. Dissembling, treacherous, mendacious, to an excess which surpasses even the usual measure of uncultivated society. Worse than uncultivated society, in the highest degree considerate of themselves, full of affected contempt for others, in physical sense, disgustingly unclean in their persons and houses. It's a dramatic statement, but the book British India, History of British India, written in 1817, becomes standard textbook fare. I'm going to take a few extra minutes today, okay? Because the rest of it is going to be fascinating for you. Stick around, everybody. 1817. Okay, and this book becomes the textbook at Haileybury College in England, where all the young people, like our friend Risley, Herbert Risley, goes to college first to get trained on India and Hinduism and Indian society and Hindu culture and so on before they get deputed to India to hold office in the British government. Okay, this is what they are reading, and they come into India having read all this in Haileybury College in England, where the history of British India has become the standard textbook. But the action moves to Germany. Now, somewhere along the way, Germany picks up on this and becomes incredibly fascinated with Sanskrit. And Augustus Schlegel, writing in 1834, says the Hindus cannot be trusted. This is what he says. If we now consult the Hindu tradition, tradition of the Hindus, recorded in the ancient Sanskrit books, we see that it designates the country situated on the two banks of the Ganges as the cradle of their nation. This is the sacred land that the Creator God, according to them, assigned to the chosen people. Now, all of this is Christian language, okay? He's using Christian language to describe the Hindus. The Creator God to the chosen people, the patriarchs, of which he revealed the true cult. If we wish to express ourselves in the manner of the ancients, we would have to say that the Indians claim to be autochthons. Autochthons. What does that mean? That they are autochthonous to India, meaning they never lived anywhere else. Their ancestors never came from anywhere else. They've always been in Bharat, the boundaries of Bharat. But then he adds, we shall see presently, decisive reasons for not giving credit to this assertion. In other words, the entire corpus of Hindu literature, which goes on and on and on, describing the geography of India, the culture of India, the traditions of India, the Varna, Jaati, the whole Upanishads, all of it, we should not give any credit to all of it. We means what? The Europeans. We should not give any credit to these assertions contained in the Hindu texts. They cannot be trusted. That's where it begins. Okay. The Europeans are superior. See, this is an argument for European superiority. Modern Europe can boast of possessing for the first time a knowledge which is lacking to scholarly and enlightened antiquity, which is still lacking today in the most civilized nations of other parts of the world, at least those not having received European communications. I speak of the complete knowledge of the terrestrial globe and of its inhabitants. This knowledge and the great perfecting of the exact and natural sciences characterizes modern Europe and forms the basis of its superiority. Okay, so very important. Okay, so the age of discovery, Europeans go out, colonize the whole world, they acquire knowledge about the whole world, and they build up the natural sciences, and the human sciences, and so on. And now they become the most knowledgeable and therefore the most superior race in the world, race, community, nation, continent in the world. And therefore, we are justified, Europe is justified in dismissing what is contained in the Hindu texts. There must have been a conquest. But here arises a new question. Are the Hindus a pure race or mixed? Okay, completely racist preoccupation. The purity of their blood, of which the ancient Hindus are so proud, has indeed been challenged. This thesis has been supported by the division into castes and by the servile condition of the last of the four, that of the Shudras. Such a degradation of the great mass of the people, it is said, listen to that, okay? It is said, could only have been introduced following a conquest. Now, this is pure speculation, and he buttresses his speculation by saying, it is said. It's kind of like, people say this is true. People say, I've heard, I hear people saying this is true. It's a way of speaking that has become popular nowadays, because then you can introduce any kind of nonsense into the discourse. If only you can say, I heard so and so, somebody said to me, and so on. It is said, could only have been introduced following a conquest. Christian Larsen. So this is written in 1834, August Schlegel, German. Christian Larsen, Norwegian, but studying in Germany. There arose a new spirit. The all-conquering impression that nature made on the consciousness of the Indian is so clearly active in his basic religious outlook that it is almost superfluous to explicitly indicate it. The divine is present and realizes itself everywhere in nature. Nature itself becomes something divine for him. Now, how peculiar of the Hindu. Nature itself is divine for the Hindu. How peculiar, how idiotic, how absurd. See, that's what he's saying, really. We consider this impression to be the genuine seed of the special development that manifested itself to the impressionable spirit of the Aryans in the land of their new home. So these Aryans, they fight their way into India, conquer it. There's a great conquest, and then they become spiritual somehow because they get fascinated by nature, some such thing. Christian Larsen, 1847. The Aryans begin contemplating the divine. But what about differences in language? If we now contemplate the entire race of the Aryan Indians in its relationship to inhabitants of the Deccan and the Vindhyas, we're immediately struck by a major difference. Through their language, the Aryan Indians evidence an original and intimate familial relationship with those we now call the Indo-Germanic peoples. They're the most extreme link of this great family of peoples in the East. Like all linguistically related peoples, they belong to the Caucasian race. The Indo-Germans, otherwise, all belong to the white peoples. Actually, many Indians bought this theory completely, hook, line, and sinker. That the Indians, especially the fair Indians, the white Indians, the northern Indians, were Caucasian once upon a time. Christian Larsen, 1847. But what about the color? Well, the darkness of color increases with southerly latitudes. We might assume that from the north to the south of India, that is, the neighboring peoples from the intermediate stages between the two endpoints, indeed we find that the Hindustanis are the lightest skinned among the inhabitants of the land to the south of the snow ranges, meaning the Himalayas. But there is not a consistent increase in the dark color toward the south. We wish provisionally to remind the reader that the word for caste in Sanskrit, Varna, originally meant color. Okay, so Varna is conflated with colors. What color? Skin color. So you had Varna as Guna Karma, Vibhagasha in the Bhagavad Gita. Now here Varna is rendered as color, especially skin color. Language and skin color, these are the two fundamental arguments. Here comes our famous friend Max Miller. Writing in 1858, Hinduism is a decrepit religion and has not many years to live. He predicted in 1858 it will take only 30 years before Hinduism is eradicated from India entirely. Okay, now if we ask the Hindus whether their laws of caste are part of their religion, some will answer that they are, others that they are not. Now, I must admit that he's probably right about that. Not probably, he is quite right about that. Because we do end up giving many different answers for the same questions. Under these circumstances, we must clearly decide the question for ourselves. For ourselves, as in Europeans. We should decide the question for ourselves. Caste, which has hitherto proved an impediment to the conversion of the Hindus, may in future become one of the most powerful engines for the conversion, not merely of individuals, but of whole classes of Indian society. Now, this is the profound insight that Max Miller generated. He said, if you try to convert an individual Hindu, he faces resistance from his jati, meaning his caste. But if you reframe your conversion efforts and try to convert the entire caste, the entire jati, you will be much more successful. And this insight has been assimilated by the Christian church very well, in fact, in the last several hundred years, a couple hundred years at least. And this is going on and on in India, unabated. So here is another interesting statement by Max Miller. Let the Shudras grow into free laborers, the Vaishyas into wealthy merchants, the Kshatriyas into powerful barons. Let the Brahmins aspire to the position of that intellectual aristocracy, which is the only true aristocracy in truly civilized countries. The four castes of the Veda will not be out of date in the 19th century, nor out of place in a Christian country. So, very interesting proposition, right? What he's saying is it is possible for the entirety of India to be converted to Christianity, and yet it retains the four castes according to the Vedas, the four Varnas, basically. He's using caste as Varna, the four Varnas. Very interesting proposition, right? So, in other words, he's disconnecting Varna Jati from Hinduism and says Varna Jati can be suitably integrated with Christianity itself. It's easier to displace Hinduism if you don't fight Varna and Jati. That's the argument he's making. Hermann Oldenburg, 1903, another German, mixing with the dark-colored aboriginals, transforms the invaders, causes the Aryan to turn into the Hindu. The Indians had as completely lost the memory of this as the corresponding events that had been forgotten by the Greeks and Italians. Fair Aryans pressed on and broke down the strongholds of the aboriginal inhabitants, the black-skinned, lawless, and regardless. The enemy was driven back, annihilated, or subjugated. Well, interestingly, if you ask the question, how come across the length and breadth of India, natively, India has no memory of such an invasion, an Aryan migration? No texts in the north speak of the triumphal entry of the Aryans. No northern text, so-called Aryan text, remembers its homeland from where they came from. No South Indian Dravidian text remembers the decisive battle they lost and they were driven back towards the south. In fact, India exhibits no memory of this invasion. And his explanation, Hermann Oldenburg's explanation, is the Indians forgot. They just forgot. They lost the memory. And so he has come to supply the missing, the memory loss. He's going to replace what the Indians have forgotten with the definitive knowledge of how this system came into being. The Aryan degrades into the Hindu over centuries and centuries. The deformation, if we may express ourselves thus, of Aryanhood into Hinduhood is only just beginning in the oldest monument of this literature, the hymns of the Rig Veda. He says even Rig Veda is an expression of this degradation from Aryanhood into Hinduhood. But it progresses rapidly. Its tendency to forms that are characterized by formlessness, the bold aerial flights that escape all reality. It's the thought of limitless realms of shapeless phantasmata, hurriedly traverses in order then to sink helplessly into childlike babbling. Now, when I read this, I'm always amused because it seems to be an instant of its own complaint. A lot of childlike babbling, a lot of phantasmata. But this is what he wrote in 1903. Giving rise to ridiculous Hindu gods. 1903. The Aryan gods with their human and humane forms were still inspired by a last breath of bracing northern air. It is Aryan air, right? Having faded or disappeared, in their place a new generation of gods has entered on stage. They are the Hindu gods. Many-headed and many-armed, ranked with snakes, resting on lotuses, enveloped by an atmosphere of mysticism, lasciviousness, and cruelty. So this is a picture of degradation, and the Aryan turns into the Hindu. See, this is the story Hermann Oldenburg is extracting as part of his own genealogy. And then Indians buy into the Aryan theory. The most famous of them all is our own Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. The usual date accepted by most scholars today for the hymns of the Rig Veda is 1500 BC. But there is a tendency ever since the Mohenjo-daro excavations to date further back these early Indian scriptures. Max Muller has called it the first word spoken by the Aryan man. It is the first word. The Rig Veda is the first word spoken by the Aryan man. So says Max Muller, and so repeats Jawaharlal Nehru. And Jawaharlal Nehru's knowledge in the discovery of India literally replicates Western discovery of India. He speaks like a Westerner. The Vedas were the outpourings of the Aryans as they streamed into the rich land of India. They brought their ideas with them from the common stock out of which grew the Avesta in Iran, 1946. So the buy-in is complete. Okay, Indians, Hindus of all stripes buy into this new theory from the West, from the German homeland of the Aryan race. Institutionalizing the caste system. The coming of the Aryans into India raised new problems, racial and political. The conquered race, the Dravidians, had a long background of civilization behind them. But there is little doubt that the Aryans considered themselves vastly superior, and the wide gulf separated the two races. Then there were also the backward aboriginal types, nomads or forest dwellers. Out of this conflict of interaction of races, conflict and interaction of races gradually arose the caste system, which in the course of succeeding centuries was to affect Indian life so profoundly. So brilliant, right? Now the Western narrative is not completely superimposed and institutionalized on the Hindu reality. We bought into it. This becomes common, everyday understanding. Heinrich von Stietenkorn, very recent. You got a Padma Bhushan, a Padma Shri, one of those things from Pranab Mukherjee at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Here's what he has to say. The analytic thinking of Western interpreters who are schooled in historical philological method stands in contrast to the traditional Indian commentators who not only harmonized and freely downplayed all the breaks in their text, i.e. the Gita, but above all, sought to read their own philosophical theological concepts out of the individual textual passages in order to secure Krishna's divine authority for them, a spectrum that has been further expanded since the beginning of India's independence movement by the politically motivated interpretations of modernity. That's a lot of words. What he's saying is Indians, Hindus, don't know how to read their own texts. Only we Germans have superior knowledge. We alone can teach them, meaning who? Teach the Hindus how to read their own texts. Because we understand philology, we understand historical, we understand these methods. And this fellow is an Indologist, a German Indologist, and our Pranab Mukherjee is giving him a Padma Shri. Why? Because Pranab Mukherjee never reads Heinrich von Stietenkorn. He doesn't know what Stietenkorn is saying, or he agrees with what Stietenkorn is saying. Okay, so you see how severe the problem is. To close, Varna, Jati versus caste are two different paradigms. On the one hand, you have an entirely different cluster of concepts and ideas. On the other hand, you have another set of concepts and ideas. It's a complete paradigm shift. Here, the emphasis is on dharma, fulfillment of duties and obligations, giving rise to interdependence and harmony. And here, the emphasis is on race, the assertion of privilege and prestige, grievances and accusations, and the rise, naturally, of grievances and accusations. These are two different paradigms. Now remember, in closing, there are Hindus who assert privilege and prestige today. They are being adharmic and they are being inconsistent with their own texts when they do so. If they read the texts properly, they would get grounded in dharma and they would get organized around the fulfillment of their duties and obligations, giving rise to interdependence and harmony in society. Okay, so that is the webinar today. Okay, the questions that are not asked is, what did the colonization and invasions do to Indian society? How was it changed? How did the situation evolve? How did it adapt? These are all areas of potential research. A lot of work needs to be done in this area, in these areas. Now, with that, I want to say that the study of Hinduism is an entirely different matter. according to Swami Vivekananda, who contested those British narratives or European narratives. Hinduism means expansion, expansion means realization. And man is to become divine. Man means woman too here. The human beings to become divine more and more from day to day in an endless progress. It's a different conception of progress, not materialistic progress, but spiritual progress. Building up character and making for everything that is good and great, bringing peace to others and peace to one's own self. Religion. People have said dharma is the highest motive power. I would rather say dharma. Dharma is the highest motive power. Therefore, ought to be studied from that standpoint. Okay. With that, I would like to close. I don't want to go any more slides. I want to invite all of you to the Orientation to Hindu Studies course that's beginning on 15th of April, less than about 5-6 days from now, 5 days from now. So this is a terrific introductory course. We'll meet a lot of different faculty members. The price of the course is $300. But today we have a discount, special discount offer. Those of you who want to participate in this course, you can get it with a discount code called OTHS100. We'll put it in the chat window in just a moment. And if you haven't done the course, now's the time to begin. Okay, get involved with Hindu University of America. Now, let me ask a question. Okay, let me ask a question. How many of you have you done the Orientation to Hindu Studies course? Have you done the Orientation to Hindu Studies course? Okay. Yes, yes, no, no. Okay. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. A lot of people have done it already. Okay. So, I'd like to invite people who have not yet done the Orientation to Hindu Studies to jump in. Okay, to jump in. There is this code, discount code, and a limited number of scholarships are available. You can go to this this URL, use the discount code, and get into the course. Okay, OTHS 100, OTHS -100. Okay, and now is as good a time as any other. Yeah, there are many faculty. Don't worry about it. Vishwa, Joydeep, Devi Datta. You'll meet a number of people during the course. Okay, let me look at the Q&A window. See, how does the caste system make Hinduism stronger? Padma, you have to study a lot more, Padma. Okay, these questions require deeper investigation. Yeah, Rishikesh Maskar is saying, why does the newspaper, social media, as well as government agencies? Yeah, see, I think the dominant narrative is so entrenched. See, when Oprah Winfrey is talking about caste today, she's simply repeating what James Mills said 200 years ago, 203 years ago. And she doesn't know it. And until she begins to recognize it, she'll keep on repeating it. And when Sheldon Pollack keeps talking about this in the way he talks about it in Columbia University, he's simply repeating what Herman Oldenburg said, what Max Miller said, what Christian Larson said, what Friedrich Schlegel said, and so on. Until that genealogy is properly understood, it's very hard to supplant or dismantle this discourse. Samira Gupta, is Jati similar to a subdivision of a certain career group? No, it's more than that. It's much more than that, okay? Jati is a very sophisticated phenomenon. Why? Surely for its longevity. Jatis live on for thousands of years. They morph and change and adapt, but their longevity far exceeds one lifetime, your lifetime or my lifetime. So it is worthwhile treating this phenomena with some measure of respect. Atul Shah. Vedic culture and ideal culture. Okay. All right, got it. Written an article. Yeah, Padma, one question. See, Brahmins, what role the British in promoting Indian civil servants? Yeah, the British began systematically co-opting the Brahmins after 1857, when the British got a firmer hold of India. They started co-opting Brahmins into the British administration, and that created a tremendous tension between the Brahmin community and the rest of India, which did not exist in prior few millennia. Okay, this is a very important question you're asking. It requires much more careful investigation. Okay, and Agikaute is saying, can you tell more about Purusha and how the Varnas came from it? Yeah, this is a Purusha Sukta, and you're talking about in the Veda. It's a very important question. It requires its own deep analysis. There's not enough time to go into it. Yeah, so Praveen Chandra is saying Hindus must apologize, own up and apologize. Yeah, that's right. See, the thing is, see, if you go on saying, I apologize for the caste system as a Hindu, I apologize on behalf of my ancestors, on behalf of 5,000 years of our civilization, I apologize because my ancestors were criminals, I'm a criminal, we're all criminals. And the more you apologize, you think it'll satiate anybody? You think the Hindus are going to be forgiven? Okay, so this is completely nonsensical. Okay, the more you apologize, the more you'll be indicted for it. Don't forget that many of us in the diaspora don't ascribe to Jati Varna. Dharani ji, you're as confused about Jati Varna as everybody else is. So you subscribe, you don't subscribe, doesn't matter. I mean, what does it matter? You believe or you don't believe? It's the same thing. Why is it people are only reading vile narrative, not reading Professor Vaidyanathan has written? What is that? Caste a social capital. Yeah, that's a good book. It's an interesting read because it casts caste in a completely new light. I think it's a good book to read.
We actually had one of our webinars with Professor Vaidyanathan.
That's right. So Jati Varna is achieved and not described by birth. Now, Jati is different from Varna, Indrani ji. You can't conflate the two. That's the whole point of this webinar. Hinduism is more than caste. Yeah, of course it is. There is yoga, meditation, there's Brahman, there's Vedanta, there's Ayurveda, there's so much more. But the West is stuck on caste. Is it fair to say Hinduism is casteist as much as slavery in Christianity and terrorism? Absolutely not. Whoever said that, you have to immediately take the orientation to Hindu studies course. Okay. Can efforts be made to buy TV time? Yeah. Hindus have to come together and create a foundation with $100 million before we can do that. Much damage is done to India. Well, first educate yourself. How do we change the narrative? You got to educate yourself. Uminda Ratno. Yeah. So that's another discourse. Okay. Adarsh Deepak Dravid flowing wisdom. All right. In some parts of India, the word Jnati is using the word Jati. Okay. See, Praveen Chandar, you have to first understand this webinar. You're on a different trip, okay? Yeah. Why are the whites not apologizing to the Hindus? It's not in the blood of the white people to apologize for anything, isn't it? I mean, not for Christianity to apologize for anything. We have to eliminate severe poverty. Yes, we do. Yeah, Satish Sharma has written a good book, Caste Conversion, the Colonial Conspiracy. Yeah, that's a good book. Casta European, yeah, sleeping. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is a very packed presentation. Okay, I did a lot of work for this. And it's part of our ongoing exploration of this phenomenon. Okay, and see, I think when I say exploration, it means not coming to this exploration with a lot of opinions. already knowing exactly what happened. We've got to get into the subject matter and understand the nuanced way in which two different narratives got intertwined, and so badly intertwined and knotted, it has become a knotty problem, a knotty problem. It's difficult to untangle this narrative mix. It's mixed up in all our minds. Okay, so that's the difficulty. Uh, with that, I'm going to say we're almost at the end here. I'm going to make one last invitation to everybody to join the Orientation to Hindu Studies course. That's the best way to get to become a part of the Hindu University of America community. And once you get into this community, there are so many courses, so many different programs and courses that are going to be so interesting and exciting, because a lot of what I learned, I presented today, I learned in another course I took with Hindu University of America. So even though I'm the president of Hindu University of America, I'm also a student of Hindu University of America. Where have you heard that, right? The president being a student. Well, it's possible. Why not? What's happening in the chat window? Any other questions? Let's go to the Q&A window here. Yeah, Mohini Saran is saying the entire Western education system. Yeah, it's extraordinary that race forms such an important component of Western discourse about itself and the world. I mean, it is extraordinary. Okay, do we have a survey, Ankur, who's interested in the course, Orientation to Hindu Studies course? Yeah. Yeah, so, when people say there is no Hindu phobia, we've not experienced any Hindu phobia over 30, 40 years, I got to say, Jago Re Hindu, like that song that Ankur played at the beginning. Yeah, Poonam is saying, what injected this into the Hindus? Why is there so much poverty in the rich white world? Yeah, there is. Is that also because of the caste? Well, you won't believe it. There is a professor called Sheldon Pollock who is writing papers sitting in Columbia University saying the Germans were very nice people until they started reading Sanskrit. And as soon as they started reading Sanskrit, there was so much poison in Sanskrit that they got consumed by it, drunk with those poisons. And then they turned into Nazis and started the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. In other words, the Germans were not responsible for the Holocaust at all. It was the Hindus and the Sanskrit language which injected the Germans with all of this poison that resulted in the Holocaust. Extraordinary logic and utterly ridiculous. They can get away with it because Hindus are not present in academia to answer these questions. So there's a survey here. Are you interested in the Orientation to Hindu Studies course? Please check a box if you can. Yeah, the replay of this presentation will be as a recording. Yeah, it will be available. People can go to write and get access to it.
Everyone who registered will get it in an email in the next 12, 24 hours.
Hindus need to start dumping on each other. Yeah, that's true. Can't argue with that. Mohini Sarin, Western academia needs to be openly challenged. Well, Mohini, you have to take the course, become an academic yourself. Well done. So, this Ananda is saying it has to be taught at a young age in the middle. Yeah, see, the problem is the young children in schools and colleges get damaged by the Western discourse. And then they start to imagine that their own parents are all casteist, backward, superstitious, obsolete, who need to be superseded. And then they become woke social justice warriors. So becoming woke and becoming a social justice warrior and dumping on your fellow Hindu seems to be the modern contemporary style right now. little kids start getting indoctrinated with. Untouchability, how did it come about? Massive story, Padma. So, the story has its genesis in the. So I'm going to be nuanced about it. The way modern society punishes its criminals is by putting them in jails, right? The way ancient Indian societies punished its transgressors was to put them out of their jatis. They became antyaja, meaning without jati, or avarna, without varna. Okay. As long as you have only a very small percentage of your population in jails, it seems society is okay. But if half your population is in jails, then there's something wrong with the society itself, isn't it? Similarly, the population of people who are so-called untouchables or outside the Varna Jati system increased rapidly during Islamic invasions and further during British colonization. This is the story that is never told because it is never investigated, it is never explored. In fact, Hindus themselves are stuck in avoiding and sidestepping the trauma of invasions and colonization to such an extent that there is no way you can properly understand this without revisiting those years and rewriting the history of those years. Indian woke social justice warrior, from a Western lens, that's correct. Yeah, you see the younger generation, is in danger because they're being injected with this wokeness now. And becoming a social justice warrior at a very premature age when they don't even understand anything properly. So this is a challenge for the adults here. Okay, 10 more messages. All right, everybody. Those of you who are thanking me for the presentation, you're very welcome. Do join the course. The $100 discount is available for a limited number of people. First come, first serve. Get in as quickly as you can, so you get the discount and you're up and running. All right. So with that, Ankur, we'll close for today. Thank you all for participating and listening. Namaste to all of you. What's the poll result, Ankur? Can you see? Okay. That's it. Namaste, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.